This past year, I was able to spend Christmas and New Year's in the United States with my family. It was so good to be back, mostly because I got to see family and some of my friends there, but also because it had been 2 years since the last time I was in the US, or North America at all. And that's the longest I've ever spent outside of my home country. For some people, this might seem like an impossible amount of time. For other people, maybe 2 years is a drop in the bucket. It's not that big of a deal for you. It really depends on you. But for me, I am very close with my family. And even though I have said before in videos that there aren't necessarily things that I miss that much from the US, it's mostly people, there still are things that are close to home and close to my heart, and things that I really like about the US culturally and food-wise and just everything. There's just things about my home country that are comfortable, that are nostalgic, and that I really like. So 2 years was a very long time to not set foot in my country. Of course, when I told you guys I was going back, and especially when I told you how long it had been since I'd been there, a lot of people asked me to do this particular video, to do reverse culture shocks. I'm not really a huge fan of the term, to be fair. It feels a bit strange to call it, I don't know, culture shock, but at the same time, it is just kind of the term that people use for the sensation when you haven't been in your home country for a very long time, you go back and suddenly things that used to be normal to you seem really weird, and it kind of hits you in the same way as when you visit a new country, or at least in a very similar way, because it kind of just startles you a little bit, and you have to go back down memory lane a little bit to kind of figure out and remember the sort of norms of your home country, if that makes sense. So I thought today I would talk about 5 of these things, because yes, I was culture shocked, reverse culture shocked when I went back with a few things. There were a few things that it took me a little bit to kind of remember. Some things a little quicker than others, some things more embarrassing than others. Without further ado, let's get into my list, because of course I've made a list. Okay, so the first thing that I have written down, and definitely the thing that hit me the most times throughout the 2 weeks that I was there, small talk. I've definitely talked about this before in some of my France videos. Small talk is not really a thing that happens that often in France. It can happen, it occasionally happens, but even when it does, normally it doesn't kind of connect in the same way. It's not quite as personal as sometimes small talk can get in the US. This can be anything, like for example, your cashier at the grocery store mentioning that, oh, I love this product, I got this the other day, I cooked this with it or something, or chatting with someone in front or behind you in line, or just anytime that you're around other people, just chatting with them. This is such a controversial thing because I've talked to so many people who love small talk, so many people who hate it and wish that people would stop doing it, both in North America and in France, and in general, just people just have very strong opinions on whether or not they like small talk. Personally, I think there's definitely a time when it's not appropriate. If someone like has headphones in, or if someone's like clearly not, you know, it's not their day, they don't want to be talked to. But as a general rule, I really like it. I think it just adds a bit of personability to the day. We're all humans. We're all here in the same world doing kind of the same things. If we end up in the same place, it's because we have a common interest or need, and why not just have a little chat with somebody? But I feel like I have lost my ability to do it naturally now because it's been so long since I've been in an environment when that's just natural for most people around you. So I was definitely caught off guard. It took me a little bit to kind of get back in the habit. Another kind of shock that I got when I was back home was driving. Absolutely everywhere. This is super common really across North America in general, except if you're in like very big cities like New York or Chicago. Public transportation is possible when you're within like a very big city, but basically the rest of the country is not set up for public transportation. There aren't good like lines and things in place. Not even bus systems in most places are very sophisticated or helpful. Within a small city, if you're going short distances, maybe it's possible, but for the majority of us in the United States, in the Midwest, you drive. That's just the way to get around. There's no other practical means. I grew up doing this. I have driven since I was 16 and I got my license at 16, and I was completely used to that before. But now that I've been in France, and specifically Paris, for 3 years, I don't drive. I don't drive in France at all. I don't have a driver's license in France. Going back to my hometown and reforming that habit of just having to drive everywhere, even the grocery store, you gotta get in the car for a couple of minutes, but you still have to use the car. That felt kind of weird, actually. I knew it. There wasn't like a shocking moment when I realized, like I knew in my head I would be taking the car, that's completely normal, but the actual routine of being there for 2 weeks, taking the car every day, whenever I needed to get out, sometimes for short distances, sometimes for really long distances, but just being in the car for that long, that consistently was kind of kind of shocking in a way. And I think for my body as well, I felt kind of weird not, walking more in a day. I still worked out. I still, went to the mall and walked around the mall and stuff. It's not like I just sat my whole trip, but it was still a lot less walking, just because when you take out the walking to the metro, the standing on the metro, just walking everywhere basically here in Paris, it kind of, I think it threw my body for more of a shock than it did my mind. I have to mention this one because it ties in with a very old video of mine. Well, it's not that old, but it's probably like 3 years old now at this point, so it's a little bit old. Vents in homes. A few years ago, I made a video where I was talking about French things that I still wasn't used to in France, and it was only like, I don't know, 5 months after I moved to France. So it wasn't very long. Now in hindsight that I've been here for 3 years, it feels like barely any time at all. But I hadn't quite figured out this thing yet. And in the video, I mentioned that opening windows all the time and just kind of forming a habit of constantly airing out your home by opening the windows was so weird to me, and I never did that growing up, and just wasn't used to it. And I got all these comments from people saying, what did you do? Like, your air must have been so terrible in your home. How could you not air out your home, etc. Some of them a lot more critical than others. And that's because, of course, I realized this after thinking about it, there are vents in North American homes. There are air circulation systems built into the homes. Obviously, for people living in really old homes in the US that maybe haven't been modernized, that's probably not the case. And this probably also maybe does exist in France as well. It's just I haven't seen it. Just every room has a vent in the room, and it just kicks on and kicks off periodically throughout the day to make sure the air stays circulated. And I just never thought about it. Growing up, it was just there. A quick note from editing Andrea, because I don't think this was super clear when I was filming this, but you do still open your windows from time to time when you have these vents in your home. The habit of having to do it on a regular basis every day, that's what was new to me. Okay, back to the video now. Funny thing is, when I went back home now this time, and it had been 2 years since I'd been in my family home or any North American home, and when you're going to sleep at night, the vent system just kicks on, and it's not that loud, but I noticed it. Growing up, that just used to be like white noise. It was just part of the house. Like the house, creaks and certain sounds, everyone's used to their homes and the weird sounds that they make. And that was just one of them to me growing up. But coming back, it was one that specifically startled me a little bit because I knew what it sounded like, but it was kind of that, it flips a switch like, oh yeah, that's what that sounds like. I can't possibly not talk about food, so let's move on to a restaurant-related one, of course, and that's paying at restaurants, specifically paying by card. I'll admit this is not something I necessarily did every day when I lived in the US, because what I'm talking about is specifically sit-down restaurants, so not the type where you go to the counter and buy your food and check out there, but the type where you sit down, you eat your meal, and then they bring you the check afterward. And I was a college student / paying off student loans last time I was in the US, so I wasn't exactly going out to restaurants every week. But of course, I have done this before. I've done it many times before. It's not something that should be that foreign to me. But when I went out with some friends when I was there, I had a complete just blank when it came time to pay the bill. And the guy brought the checkbook and he put it down, separated checks, because that's a thing in the US you can do. He asked, how we wanted to be paying, so they split the checks. He gave me my check in the little like booklet they give you. And I saw the bill and I just completely blanked, and I was like, how do I pay with the credit card? I remember you're supposed to stick it in the book, because in the US I did remember that they don't bring the machines to the table. They take your card back and they do it at their cash register because you don't have a PIN in the US. The entire system basically is different when it comes to cards. So you don't have to enter a PIN for a credit card specifically in the US. So I knew that, he's gonna take it back, so I need to give him my card, but then I couldn't remember, do I write the tip on the bill now and he goes back and he adds the tip then? Or do I add the tip afterward? And I couldn't remember. The simplest little thing. It was not even that complicated. And I had to ask my friend, excuse me, how do we do this in my country again? Thankfully, my friend is really nice and non-judgy, and he did not judge me for my inability to pay my own bill at a restaurant. Last on this list is another food-related thing, and that is just menus in general. I could have probably split this up into several different points, but I kind of just want to touch on two little things. The first being very simple, calorie counts on menus. I remembered they did that. I miss them sometimes in France, and yet still coming back, going to like Quiznos and Subway and places like that that are just very simple fast food, and they have the calories written next to the sandwiches. That re-startled me again, because it, is something I was used to, and it's actually fairly recent, I think, in the US, like within the past 10-15 years. So when I was a kid, that wasn't necessarily the case, but yeah, it was kind of like a reverse shock to see the calories, to actually be able to make my decision based on, you know, how high the calories were in a sandwich if I wanted to get a different kind. It's actually kind of nice, but just seeing it was kind of surprising. The other little culture shock that I got from menu related things was just what was on the menu, specifically when it came to dietary options. Oh my gosh, this is something I have complained about France before. It's the only thing that, as a broad scale, I am very critical of when it comes to French food, and that is just dietary choices for people with dietary restrictions. You can get stuff at grocery stores, that's usually not a problem, but going to restaurants can be a big challenge for those of us who have dietary preferences or restrictions. I personally am a vegetarian. I've been vegetarian for, I think, 2 years now, maybe over 2 years. I haven't actually, I never put it on the calendar the day that I completely stopped eating meat, but it's been a long time now that I've been a vegetarian. In theory, that's not that complicated of a diet. It can be more challenging, for example, to be a vegan because a lot of things do have cheese and dairy kind of in them. So I understand that can be just super challenging. Even in North America, that can be challenging. But as a vegetarian, it shouldn't be that difficult to find non-meat, non-fish dishes, but it has been such a challenge. Even in Paris, even in the capital city of France, it can be really challenging just to go out to any restaurant and to find something any more than a side salad that doesn't have some sort of meat in it or on it or somehow incorporated. In the US though, even when we were in small cities, fairly small towns, there was just almost always at least one option for vegetarians, and often there was stuff for gluten-free and vegan. There's often like allergy notes and things, and they always have a note on the menu to say, you know, if you have certain allergies, please talk to us. And even more of that stuff is indicated. It's not just that you have menu options, but often they actually have it indicated, you know, this one's vegetarian, this one's gluten-free. Of course, there are still restaurants and places that you can go where you might not find that many options. And as a vegan, I'm sure you still have trouble because a lot of, especially Midwestern food, does have a lot of cheese in it. We love our cheese, so I know that's going to be challenging. But it's just in general much more open to trying to sort of not cater to, but just be available to people with dietary restrictions and dietary preferences. Going back to the US, it was a genuine shock, but a very good one to find that I could just open a menu and 9 times out of 10 there would be maybe a vegetarian section. If not, there'd be several items that have a little green, you know, like plant next to it or something to say that it was vegetarian or maybe even vegan. Even stuff that wasn't indicated if you look through the ingredients list, often things didn't have meat or the meat was optional. It was just so much easier, and I guess I expected it to be because I knew that France had been a lot more challenging since I moved here, but going from kind of struggling a lot of the time and kind of getting used to the fact that I have to decipher menu items very carefully to know what I can eat and what I can't eat, and then just making it so simple to where I have options immediately on every menu, it was still surprising in a very good way. I could probably just keep rattling off little things that I noticed when I was back home, but I'm gonna stop the video there with just those things. These were kind of the things that either I experienced the most or just that I found the most bizarre out of all things to shock me. These things were kind of small, little everyday things that still managed to both surprise me and to bring back nostalgia. It's weird because it's kind of a similar sensation to a culture shock when you move to a different country, but it's kind of like tinged with nostalgia in this really weird way to where it's shocking in the same way, but then it sort of feels familiar even as it's surprising you. It's really interesting actually, this kind of idea. Let me know in the comments if you know exactly what this feels like, if you too have lived abroad for a significant amount of time and then come back home and just been struck by weird everyday things, or maybe even bigger things than the things that I mentioned. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you very soon in another video.